She resisted a forced bond with a human warrior. Until she met him, I heard the verdict before the council finished speaking. They did not ask me. They announced it the way you announce weather. As a fact already settled, already beyond argument, already done. High Consular Valeth of the Aethan Dominion, 4th Bloodline, Keeper of the Stellar Archive, 312 years in service to the Compact, would be soul-tethered to a human. A human. I remember the exact feeling that moved through my chest when the words landed. It was not sadness. It was not fear. It was a cold, precise, entirely controlled fury, and I held it very still while the council members watched my face for a reaction. I did not give them one, not a flicker. I had spent 3 centuries learning how to hold my expression like a closed door, and I held it then. The chamber was quiet. 21 delegates from 16 species sat in their curved seats around the central platform. The light in the compact council hall was always the same, a pale, colorless glow that made everyone look slightly unwell. I stood at the center of it, the way every subject of a major ruling had to stand, alone, no aides, no advocates, just me and the weight of the decision they had already made before I walked in. Councillor Draveth, eldest of the Selhari delegation, with his gray-green skin and his permanent look of mild satisfaction, leaned forward over his podium. The arrangement reflects the highest political necessity, he said. You understand what is at stake. I understood perfectly. That was the problem. The Galactic Compact had been fracturing for 11 years. The Eastern border agreements were crumbling. 2 elder races had withdrawn from the joint security framework. The Tarathi hegemony was pressing against 4 frontier systems at once, and the Compact's response had been slow, divided, and embarrassing. Every major power was scrambling to shore up alliances using whatever tools they had left. The humans had become the most valuable tool in the known galaxy. No one had predicted that, 60 years ago, when humanity first pushed past their own solar system in those rattling, overbuilt ships that every species in the Compact quietly laughed at. The general assessment was that they were a young race, a minor race, interesting perhaps as a curiosity but certainly not significant. They were too emotional, too short-lived, too unpredictable. Their technology was generations behind, their politics were chaotic, their military doctrine was unproven. And then came the breach wars. The Tarathi had hit 12 systems in 9 months. Every species in the Compact sent forces. Every species retreated, or held defensive lines, or negotiated terms that cost them territory. The humans sent 2 divisions of infantry, and a fleet of ships that looked like they had been built by people who were personally angry about the situation, and they pushed back. Not just held, pushed back. They took ground that the Tarathi had held for 4 years, in engagements that made senior military analysts across 5 species sit down and stare at the tactical reports in silence. It was not just that they won. It was how they won. The humans had a way of fighting that no one fully understood, adaptive, relentless, almost irritatingly creative under pressure. They did not follow the standard doctrines. They did not retreat when retreat was the logical option. They found solutions in situations that had no solutions. And when it was over, when the Tarathi pulled back to the agreed ceasefire line, the humans had fewer casualties than any other species that had engaged, and they had taken the most ground. After that, every major house and dynasty in the Compact wanted a human, not just as military allies, as bonded partners, as political anchors. The soul tether right was ancient, older than the Compact itself, and it created bindings that were legally, biologically, and psychically permanent. To bond with a powerful military asset was to tie their loyalty, their protection, their full capability to your house for life. Every council, every dynasty, every family of significance was racing to secure one before the pool ran dry. I had watched it happening with contempt for 3 years. I had made my position clear in 2 formal addresses to the council. Humans were children by any civilized standard. Their longest living individual barely reached 120 years. They had been in space for less than 2 centuries. They were loud and messy and deeply, profoundly strange. The soul tether right was sacred. The idea of binding mine to one of them was an insult not just to me but to the right itself. The council had listened to both addresses with the polite, empty attention of people who had already decided. Sergeant Commander Eli Morrow. Councillor Draveth continued, reading from the dossier on his screen. Decorated veteran of the breach wars. 3 major engagements. 2 commendations from the Joint Compact Command. Currently serving as a senior strategic advisor to the human colonial fleet. He arrives at your estate in 3 days. I kept my face still. Sudsken Lotades after arrival, said a second councillor, Myrith of the Vahari delegation. A small woman with silver-threaded hair who had always liked the sound of her own voice. The pre-bonding period will allow both parties to satisfy the rights requirements of willing proximity. As always, the Compact expects the cooperation of all parties involved. Willing proximity. That was the formal term for the 10-day period, during which a bonding pair was required to remain within the same residence, share meals at least once daily, and participate in at least 3 formal engagement sessions. It was designed, in the ancient tradition, to ensure that both parties had genuine familiarity before the tether was formed. In practice, in political bondings like this one, it was a formality, a performance. Everyone knew it. I stepped down from the central platform when the council dismissed me. I walked out of that pale, colorless hall at exactly the same pace I had walked in. My aide, Sorel, a young Athan who had served me for 18 years, and who knew my moods better than most, fell into step beside me without a word. We were 3 corridors away from the chamber before I spoke. Pull his full file, I said. Every record, every engagement report, every personal assessment on file with the compact military. I want to read everything. Of course, Sorel said. And increase the estate's environmental settings. Gravity to 1.8 standard. Temperature to 12 degrees. Tell the household staff to prepare formal reception protocol. Full ceremonial regalia. Sorel hesitated for exactly half a step. Is there a particular reason for the environmental changes? I looked at him. He did not ask again. The truth was simple. I had no intention of going through with this bonding. I had 3 days and a 10-day pre-bonding period to ensure that Eli Morrow, Sergeant Commander of the Human Colonial Fleet, found my estate so unwelcoming that he requested a withdrawal. Political pressure had forced this arrangement, but political pressure could also end it. If the human himself formally declined, the council could not compel him. They needed his cooperation as much as mine. I would make sure he did not cooperate. I spent the next 3 days reading his file. It was not what I expected, and I did not let that change anything. The military records were thorough, and they painted a picture of a man who was, by human standards, genuinely formidable. His tactical assessments were concise and unusually accurate. His conduct reports used words like calm and methodical and steady under pressure with a consistency that ran across 16 different commanding officers over 20 years. He had been in 3 engagements that the compact officially classified as catastrophic, situations where his unit had every tactical reason to fail, and he had found a way through all 3. There were personal notes too, small things. He had spent 2 years teaching combat strategy to recruits who had never expected to see combat. Every instructor review from that period mentioned the same thing, that his students liked him, and that his students performed unusually well. One report, from a Vihari review board that had observed a joint training exercise, noted with what seemed like genuine bewilderment that the human sergeant had a gift for making people trust him quickly. I read that line twice. Then I closed the file and went to review the gravity settings on the estate's lower floors. He would arrive in the morning. I had 7 prepared statements ready. I had the household staff positioned with care. The grand entrance hall had been arranged to emphasize scale, formality, and the specific kind of cold beauty that was designed to remind visitors of exactly how small they were. I was ready. I told myself I was completely ready. I stood in the center of the entrance hall at the appointed hour, in full formal attire, with 20 years of diplomatic training behind my expression and 3 centuries of Athon bloodline in my spine. And I waited for the human to arrive. The doors opened. He walked in, and the very first thing Eli Morrow did was look around the room the way a soldier looks at an unfamiliar space, not with wonder, not with intimidation, but with the quiet professional focus of someone who was simply noting where everything was. In 4 seconds, he had checked every corner, every guard, every door, every potential hazard in the room. I watched him do it. He did not know I was watching that specifically. He was just doing it the way people breathe, without thinking about it, because it was simply what he did. Then he looked at me and he nodded. Not a bow, not a formal greeting, a nod, the way you might greet a colleague across a corridor. I opened my mouth to deliver the first of my 7 prepared statements. You've set the gravity to 1.8, he said. His voice was level and unhurried, and the temperature's around 12. That's deliberate. He paused for a moment. I've slept in worse, he said. I stood there, my prepared statement still undelivered, and felt something I had not felt in quite some time. He was already looking at the ceiling, studying the architecture with what appeared to be genuine interest. I took a quiet breath and decided that this was going to require a different approach entirely. The second day was worse. I say worse because nothing went the way I intended, and because each time I thought I had found the angle that would finally make Eli Morrow show some kind of weakness. He simply did not. He was not performing toughness. He was not putting on a brave face. He was just steady, consistently, stubbornly, unremarkably steady, in the way that a stone at the bottom of a river is steady. Not because it is trying to resist the current, simply because it is a stone. I had moved him to the eastern quarters of the estate on the first evening, the rooms farthest from the main hall, with the narrowest windows and the dullest view. which overlooked the maintenance courtyard. Every other guest of political significance who had ever visited had at least made a comment about the view. Eli looked at the maintenance courtyard, noted that there was a clear sight line to the outer wall, and said it was a practical choice. I could not tell if he was sincere or making a quiet point. I still cannot tell, thinking back on it. On the morning of the second day, I called the first formal engagement session. The rite required 3 of them across the 10-day period. Each session lasted no less than 2 hours and was supposed to involve genuine conversation, the kind of exchange that the ancient architects of the soul tether rite believed was necessary before 2 people could be meaningfully bound. I had always found the requirement sentimental and impractical. In political bondings, it was standard practice to fill the sessions with formal statements, careful diplomatic phrasing, and the kind of safe, empty exchange that communicated nothing while technically satisfying the requirement. I sat across from him at the long stone table in the formal meeting room. Sorrel had prepared tea and the traditional small plates of Athen ceremonial food, which were bitter and very difficult to eat without practice. Most non-Athen guests either refused them or struggled visibly. Eli ate one without any particular expression, considered it for a moment, and said it tasted like very strong tea in solid form. Then he ate another one. I delivered my opening statement. It was precise and formal and made absolutely clear that my participation in the forthcoming ceremony was contingent on the satisfaction of certain political and personal conditions, several of which I had deliberately made impossible to satisfy within the given time frame. It was a masterpiece of diplomatic language, and it communicated, in the most correct and proper terms, that I did not want him there. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I understand. I want to say something in response, and I'd like you to tell me if I'm reading the situation wrong." I told him to go ahead. "You've spent 3 centuries building something that matters to you," he said. "Your bloodline, your position, your work. You had a future that you'd planned for yourself, and the council took it and handed it to a stranger, a human stranger, which is probably the worst version of this for someone with your background. And now you're in a 10-day period with that stranger, and you have to at least appear to be cooperating while you look for a way to make it end. I think that's accurate." I looked at him. "What I want you to know," he continued, "is that I was also told I didn't have a choice, and I also think that's wrong. So if you find a way out of this that doesn't involve me leaving with a formal withdrawal, which would end my commission, by the way, I'll take it with you. I'm not here to trap you." There was a long silence. "Why are you telling me that?" I asked. "Because you're smart enough that if I didn't say it, you'd figure out there was something I was hiding, and then you'd spend the next 10 days looking for it. This way we can just talk." I hated, very quietly, that this was a reasonable thing to say. I redirected the conversation to political topics. I was confident on political ground. I had more experience, more knowledge, and more context than any human alive. I expected to find his thinking shallow or naive, or reliant on the simplistic frameworks that young species often defaulted to when confronting galactic-scale problems. His thinking was not shallow. He did not know as much as I did. That was simply a matter of age and access. But what he knew, he had thought about carefully. He asked questions that reached the actual center of the problem rather than the surface. When I explained something he did not know, he incorporated it quickly and accurately without letting it destabilize whatever he had already understood. He disagreed with me twice, genuinely, directly, with specific reasons, and both times he was at least partially right. I found myself making a real argument in response to his second disagreement, rather than the formal deflection I had intended. I caught myself doing it and went back to formal deflection. It felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. That afternoon, I reviewed the estate's security protocols with my head of household, Oran, who had served the family for 40 years. Oran was not a man of many words. He had the kind of face that rarely changed expression. "What is your assessment?" I asked him. He thought about it. "He offered to help me rearrange the storage crates in the lower courtyard this morning," Oran said. Said he noticed they'd shifted and there was a balance problem. He was correct about the balance problem. "We've been ignoring it for 2 months. I looked at him. "He moved 4 of them himself," Oran added in the same tone of voice he used for inventory reports. I went back to my quarters and sat with that information for a while. I was not sure what to do with it. A man who moved crates in a courtyard he had no reason to care about was either performing helpfulness for an audience, or he simply noticed a problem and fixed it because it was there. I had seen the first kind many times. I did not have a clean category for the second kind. On the evening of the second day, I walked past the entrance hall and heard, through the half-open door to the reading room, the sound of quiet turning pages. I stopped. I looked in. Eli was sitting in the oldest chair in the room, the one closest to the window, where the evening light fell across the floor. reading from one of the archive volumes I kept in the lower shelves. Not the decorative ones. The old ones. A volume of early 8th and navigational philosophy, 300 years old, written in old compact script that very few non-Athan could read. He was reading it slowly, occasionally stopping to look out the window and then back at the page. He had a small piece of paper on the arm of the chair, and he was writing down words. I could tell from across the room that he was making a list of words he did not know, to look up later. He did not know I was in the doorway. I stood there for longer than I should have. Long enough to feel the strange, unwelcome warmth of the moment, the specific quiet of watching someone read a thing you love. In the light you have looked at your whole life, with the complete and unperforming attention of someone who is simply interested. I walked away before he could see me. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Adjust strategy." I did not write what I should have written, which was closer to, "I do not know what to do with this man, and I am not sure that is entirely a problem." I was not ready to write that. On the third day, the rival house made their move, and everything changed. I was in the lower archive when Oran came to find me. His expression was still mostly neutral, which was how I knew it was serious. A man with a neutral face who seeks you out personally has already sorted through the panic and arrived at the part where action is required. "There is a situation in the East Wing," he said. By the time I reached the security room and pulled up the feed from the exterior cameras, it had already been 4 minutes since the alert. 3 figures had entered through the maintenance access point. The one with the clear sightline to the outer wall that Eli had noted on the first day. They moved with practiced efficiency. They were not thieves. Their equipment and formation said exactly what they were. Eli was in the east corridor. He had no weapon. He had gone for an early walk, alone, which he had done every morning. And he had no weapon because I had not offered him one, and he had not asked for one, and I had not thought to consider this situation because I had spent 2 days thinking about how to get him to leave, rather than thinking about who else might want him removed. I watched the security feed with my hand flat on the console, and I did not breathe. What happened in the next 3 minutes was very fast and very quiet and extraordinarily efficient. Eli moved the way water moves around obstacles, not fighting the shape of the space but using it completely. He was aware of all 3 of them from the moment they came around the corner. I could tell because of the way his body changed. A small, almost invisible shift, the kind that a person makes when they have done this before, and their training steps in ahead of their thoughts. He neutralized the first one with the environment. The corridor had a storage unit on the left wall with a door that opened outward. He used the door. The second came in fast from the right, and Eli stepped inside the angle of the attack rather than away from it, which made the attack useless, and brought it to the floor with a technique so precise it looked simple, which is how you can tell it was not simple at all. The third one stopped. Eli looked at him. He said something I could not hear on the feed. The third person made a careful decision and stepped back, and then turned and left. Eli stood in the corridor for a moment. He looked down at the 2 people on the floor. He checked, methodically and without hurry, that both of them were breathing. They were. He had made sure of it. The whole thing had been calibrated. Every movement, not just to win but to win without any more damage than was absolutely necessary. Then he straightened up, rolled one shoulder once, and went to find Oran to report what had happened. He did not come to find me. He reported to the head of household, because that was the correct security protocol, and then he went back to his room. I stood at the console for a long time after the feed went still. Then I went to find him. He was sitting on the narrow bench at the end of the east corridor, outside his quarters, with his hands around a cup of something warm that Oran must have brought him. The corridor was quiet. The light was the low, amber color of the late-hour setting that the estate switched to at this time of day. I had a prepared statement in mind. Something measured and formal about security responsibilities and the council's obligation to investigate the origin of the attempt. Something that kept the appropriate distance. I stood in front of him, and the prepared statement was suddenly the wrong shape for the moment. "Are you hurt?" I asked. He looked up. "No," he said. Then, after a small pause, "Are you?" I had not been anywhere near the corridor. There was no physical reason for him to ask if I was hurt. I understood that he was asking something different, whether I was all right. Whether the fact that someone had sent people to my estate to remove him before the bonding ceremony had shaken me. It had. I sat down on the other end of the bench. There was no chair, and standing over him felt wrong for reasons I could not immediately name. "The rival house," I said. "This was their action. I know the method." "I figured it was political," he said. He took a sip from his cup. He did not seem shaken. He seemed tired in the way of a person who has been tired for a long time and has become used to it. "I should have ensured you had better security," I said. "I should have considered this possibility." "You were thinking about other things," he said. Not unkind, not sharp, just accurate. That is not an excuse. No, he said, but it's a reason. Those aren't the same thing. We sat in the amber light of the corridor for a while. Somewhere in the estate, Oren was already coordinating with the compact security office. Somewhere in a political chamber I could not see, the rival house was recalibrating. The situation had changed, and we were both sitting in the new shape of it. Tell me something true, I said. I did not plan to say that. It came out before I had finished deciding whether to say it. He turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were a particular dark brown, the kind that appears almost black in low light. I noticed, sitting this close, that he looked tired in a way that was older than his physical age, like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had stopped expecting help with it. I didn't want to come here, he said. I was told it was a political necessity, and I agreed because I've agreed to a lot of things that were political necessities, and I'm very tired of it. But I want to be honest with you from the beginning, because I think you've had enough people not being honest with you. I looked at him. That's a true thing, he said. What's yours? I thought about it. I thought about the 7 prepared statements, and the maintenance courtyard crates, and the old navigational philosophy book, and the amber light in this corridor. I have been trying to make you want to leave, I said, since before you arrived. I know, he said, and you stayed anyway. I was trying to figure out whether the reason I was staying was the political necessity or something else. Have you figured that out? He was quiet for a moment. Getting there, he said. I did not know what to do with the warmth that moved through my chest when he said that. I noted it with the careful, clinical part of my mind, and I labeled it as a variable requiring further consideration. I did not know yet that it was going to become the most important variable I had ever tried to understand. We sat there until Oran came to give the security report. I went to my quarters that night and did not sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about the man sitting 2 corridors away in the narrowest, dullest room in the estate, and I thought about all the things I had assumed, and all the things I had been wrong about, and I thought about the specific, careful honesty he kept offering me, unprompted, like someone laying down something they had been carrying a long time. I did not write in my journal that night. Some things are too large to fit in a journal while they are still happening. You have to wait until they have finished happening before you can find the right words. I did not know, lying there in the dark, that this one would take months before it finished happening. What I knew was smaller and more immediate. I had stopped trying to make him leave. I was not sure what I had started instead. There are things you learn about a person in 7 days that you would not learn in a year of formal occasions. You learn how they move when they think no one is watching. You learn what they eat when they have a choice, and what they skip when they are preoccupied. You learn which silences belong to thinking, and which belong to something that has no immediate name. You learn whether they are the kind of person who is kind only when kindness costs them nothing, or the kind who is kind without tracking the cost at all. I learned all of these things about Eli Morrow across days 3 through 9 of the pre-bonding period, and each one of them complicated the clear, simple plan I had arrived at this arrangement with. The days had a shape. He was up early, before the estate's morning cycle shifted the lighting, and he walked for an hour through whatever part of the grounds I had not blocked off as restricted. I began, somewhere around day 4, to take my morning reading to the East Terrace, which had a view of the lower gardens. This was, I told myself, entirely coincidental. The East Terrace had good light in the mornings, that was all. On the morning of day 4, he came to the terrace directly, without the walk, and sat down across from me without asking permission. He had a cup of the bitter Athen tea. He had started drinking it without ceremony at some point, apparently having decided he preferred it to the alternatives, and he had a small notebook, the paper kind, which I had not seen anyone use in decades. You're writing by hand, I said. Old habit, he said. Started during the breach deployment. We lost power to the digital systems twice in 14 days. After the second time, I started keeping paper notes for anything I needed to remember. What do you write in it now? He thought about it. Things I want to remember, he said. Then he glanced at me. Questions I want to ask when the moment is right. Is the moment right now? Getting there, he said, which was already becoming something I recognized as his answer for things he was still deciding. He asked his question the following morning. We had shifted, without formally deciding into having breakfast on the East Terrace every day. It was not a formal engagement session. It was simply where we both appeared in the mornings. And the conversation that happened there was different from the formal sessions. Less prepared, less careful, more likely to go somewhere neither of us had planned. What was your life supposed to look like? He asked. I set down my cup. Before the council's decision, he said. You had a plan. What was it? No one had asked me that. In 300 years of political life, in every formal meeting and diplomatic session and council address, No one had simply asked me what I had wanted for my own life. I intended to complete the expansion of the Stellar Archive, I said. We have records from only 60% of the Compact's explored systems. The remaining 40% are incomplete, some because of access restrictions, some because of resource limitations. I calculated that with consistent effort over the next century, I could bring that to full documentation. It would be the most comprehensive historical and scientific record in the Compact. He looked at me while I said this. Not the polite half-attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, the real kind. That would be useful, he said. Not just as a record. If the frontier situation escalates, a complete archive would give every species in the Compact a shared factual foundation. Negotiations. A lot of border disputes come down to competing historical claims. I had not considered that application. I had thought of the archive as a scholarly project, as a matter of preservation and knowledge. He had looked at it and immediately seen its political utility in the current situation. Yes, I said. That is correct. Is that still possible? With the bonding? I do not know, I said honestly. I think it is, he said. The bonding doesn't stop you from working. And whatever my commission becomes after this, my access to the Colonial Fleet's frontier data is useful to that project, if you still want to do it. I looked at him. I'm saying I would help, he said, not because the council requires it, because it's worth doing, and you're the right person to do it, and I would actually be useful. I kept my expression carefully neutral, which took more effort than it should have. That afternoon I had the second formal engagement session on my schedule. I sat across from Eli at the long stone table, and I went through the prepared questions that the rite required, and he answered them without the careful diplomatic language that most political bond candidates used. He answered them as if they were real questions. When I asked him about his values, he said honesty first, and when I looked up from my notes, he said, I know that sounds simple. I mean it specifically. I've been in enough situations where the honest thing and the convenient thing weren't the same, and I've seen what happens when people consistently choose convenient. I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to do that, even when honesty is costly, I asked. Especially then, he said. That's when it matters. I wrote that down, not for the right, for myself. On day 6, I stopped testing him. I did not announce this. I did not mark it in my journal. I simply became aware, somewhere in the middle of a long conversation about the Compact's eastern border strategy, that I had stopped holding myself at a careful distance and was simply talking. The way I talked with people I trusted. I caught it, noted it, and did not pull back. I let the conversation continue. He was good to talk to. That was a simple and insufficient way of describing it, but it was accurate. He had a quality that I had not expected and could not easily name. A kind of steadiness in the presence of complexity. He did not need things to be simple. He did not reach for easy conclusions. He held difficult questions openly, looked at them from multiple angles, and was comfortable sitting with the ones that did not resolve. I had been doing this alone for a very long time. On the evening of day 7, I was walking the upper corridor of the estate's main building when I stopped at the sound of voices from the courtyard below. I looked down through the high window. Oran was standing near the stone bench with a young member of the household staff, a girl of about 15 years, daughter of one of the groundskeepers, who had recently been assigned to indoor duties and was visibly struggling with the adjustment. She was standing with her shoulders tight and her face held in the careful blankness of a young person, trying very hard not to show that she was overwhelmed. Eli was sitting on the sojourn by. He had stopped to talk to both of them, apparently in the middle of some task of his own, and he was now listening to Oran explain the girl's situation. He asked the girl 2 questions I could not hear. Whatever she answered, he nodded. Then he said something that made Oran look faintly surprised, and made the girl's shoulder ease down by about an inch. I did not know what he said. I only knew the result, that a young person who had been holding herself very tightly for the duration of the conversation left it a little less tight. I stood at the window for a long time after they had all moved on. That night I sat with my journal open and wrote a single line. He is not what I thought he was. I looked at it. Then I turned to a new page and wrote instead what had actually been true for several days. I do not think I want him to leave. And then, underneath, in smaller letters, as if making it smaller would make it less significant, I do not think this is politics anymore. I left both pages in the journal without crossing anything out. That was its own kind of honesty. The 8th day was quiet. The 9th was not. Word reached me in the mid-morning that the rival house had escalated. They had done it cleanly and through official channels, which was worse than a second direct action, because it meant they were confident. They had filed a formal dispute with the Compact Council against the terms of the bonding arrangement, citing procedural irregularities in the original ruling. It was a delay tactic, not a serious legal challenge. I could see that immediately, but delay was all they needed. If the filing was accepted for review, It would push the ceremony past the valid window for the current alignment period. The next valid window was 9 months away. 9 months in which the treaty protections my house relied on would be suspended. 9 months in which the eastern border situation would continue to deteriorate. 9 months in which the colonial fleet that Eli was attached to would be operating without the compact's full security backing. I was reviewing the filing in my study when Eli knocked on the open door. I told him to come in. He read the summary I held out to him. His face did not change, but I had learned by then to read the small signals, the way his breath slowed slightly, the way his hands settled flat on the desk when he finished reading. He was thinking through the shape of the problem the way he always did, from every angle at once. "They're counting on one of us to flinch," he said. "Yes. If you request a withdrawal on the grounds of the original objection, the filing becomes redundant and they've achieved their goal without the review." "Yes. And if I request a formal withdrawal, my commission ends and the fleet loses its full compact security backing during the border situation." "Yes." He put the summary down on the desk. He looked at me directly, and I looked back, and there was a moment in the space between us that was very quiet and very clear. "I'll tell you what I'm thinking," he said, "and then I want to hear what you're thinking." I nodded. "I think this has stopped being a political problem for me," he said. "I think it stopped being that a few days ago. I'm not going to ask you to make a decision based on what I feel, because this is your life and your choice, and you should have that choice clearly in front of you. But I want to be honest about where I am, because I told you I would be." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about my journal. "I have been writing things in my journal this week," I said, "that I did not expect to write." He did not say anything. He waited. "I intended to end this arrangement," I said. "I was quite certain I would. I prepared for it very thoroughly." "I know," he said. "I find that I no longer want to," I said. "I want to be precise about the reason. It is not the political necessity. It has not been the political necessity for several days." He was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll figure out the rival house together," he said. "Yes," I said, "we will." We spent the next 4 hours building a counterfiling. He knew the compact's legal framework with the practical specificity of a man who had spent 20 years navigating it from the ground, and I knew it with the historical depth of a woman who had watched it built. Together we wrote something that was better than either of us would have written alone. Sorrel submitted it before the evening cycle. That night, neither of us mentioned what had been said in my study. We did not need to. It was already settled, in the quiet way of things that have moved from undecided to decided while no one was formally watching. The next morning was the day before the ceremony. I was in the archive room when Eli came to find me. He had his notebook in one hand and an expression I had not seen on him before, careful, deliberate, as if he had been deciding something for a long time and had finally finished deciding it. He sat down across from me at the archive table. "I have something to say," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." I set down what I was reading. "I can still withdraw," he said. "I've already drafted a formal refusal to the council. It will cost me my commission, and I've made peace with that. You have my word that if you hand me the word and you want to walk away from this, I will file it tonight, and there will be no consequence to you beyond the 9-month delay." He put a folded piece of paper on the table between us. "That's the refusal," he said. "It's yours to give back to me or to keep." I looked at the paper. I did not pick it up. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to have this choice from the beginning," she said. "Nobody gave it to you. I'm giving it to you now. Whatever you decide, it should be yours." The archive room was very quiet. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low ambient sound of the estate settling in the midday warmth. I thought about 300 years of a life I had built with great care and considerable effort. I thought about the archive, and the things I had planned, and the future I had mapped with the precision of a person who believed that a well-made plan was its own kind of safety. I thought about a man who moved crates because they were unbalanced, and drank bitter tea without complaint, and read old navigational philosophy in a chair by a window, and made a young girl's shoulders drop an inch just by asking the right questions. I thought about the warmth in my chest that I had stopped trying to argue away somewhere around day 4. I looked at the paper on the table between us. I left it there. "I do not want to walk away," I said. He did not look relieved exactly. He looked like someone who had been holding something carefully for a long time and could finally set it down. "Then we'll go to the ceremony tomorrow," he said. "Yes," I said, "we will." I should say that I had prepared in my own way for the ceremony itself. I had read the ancient texts. I had attended 2 bonding ceremonies in my lifetime as an observer, from the proper formal distance. I understood the mechanics of it, the words, the sequence, the specific moment of contact that began the tether, the period of adjustment afterward as 2 psychic architectures began the slow, permanent process of learning each other. I had prepared for mechanics. I had not prepared for what it actually felt like. The ceremony was in the morning, in the estate's oldest courtyard, which had been used for this purpose 3 times before in my family's history. The light came down in long, pale lines through the carved stone screens on the eastern wall. Sorrel stood as my witness. A compact official who had traveled from the capital stood as the neutral third party. Oran was there, in the back, because he had asked to be, and I had said yes. We stood across from each other, and the official spoke the words, and I spoke mine, and Eli spoke his. And when the moment of contact came, a formal touch, palm to palm, the oldest gesture of the rite, I felt the tether begin. It was not what I had expected. I had expected something defined and decisive, a click, a shift, a sharp new line in my awareness. What I felt was quieter than that. It was a warmth that moved up from my palm and spread slowly, like light through water. And in that warmth, I felt the first edge of another mind. Not thoughts, not words, but impressions, the way you feel weather before it arrives. A vast, steady warmth. A tiredness that went deeper than the body. Something that surprised me and made me hold very still. What felt unmistakably like relief. Relief from him. Relief at being here in this courtyard in this moment with me. I looked up at his face and he was looking at me with the same quiet, direct attention he had given me from the very beginning, and I understood that what I had felt coming through the new tether was exactly what it appeared to be, without cover, without management. Just honest. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without management. The ceremony continued. The official completed the formal declarations. At some point Sorrel was quietly pleased and Oran was very still in the way of people who are holding a large feeling with a neutral face. The light moved on the stone floor, and the tether settled. Not completely, that took weeks. But the first shape of it settled, like a key finding its lock, and I stood in the old courtyard and felt, for the first time in longer than I could accurately measure, that I was not carrying everything alone. The eastern border crisis resolved 12 days after the ceremony. Eli proposed a tactical solution, a repositioning of the colonial fleet that created a new defensive geometry without requiring the contested treaty adjustments. And I filed the diplomatic framework through Dominion channels. The compact's senior military analysts approved it within 6 hours. The rival house, lacking the bonding disruption they had counted on, had no remaining leverage and withdrew their filing without comment. The council sent a formal acknowledgement. I did not reply immediately. I was busy. The weeks that followed had a different quality from any weeks I had known before. The tether deepened gradually, the way a river deepens a channel, not dramatically, but in a way that became over time unmistakable. I felt him at the edges of my awareness in the way you feel weather. Not his thoughts, his states, his presence. When he was in pain, a recurring thing, from an injury in the breach wars that had not healed completely. I felt it before he said anything. I said nothing. I simply ensured that the warmest room in the estate was available in the mornings, because warm rooms help with deep joint pain, and he had not mentioned it to me, and I did not want him to feel observed. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything. The third morning he walked into the warm room and found it prepared and ready. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at me across the room. I was at the archive table with my reading, not looking up, in the specific way of a person who is pretending not to notice something. He did not say anything about it. He poured himself a cup of the bitter tea and sat down with his notebook. 20 minutes later, without looking up from whatever he was writing, he said, "Thank you. The morning light is better in here," I said. He did not reply to that, but I felt, through the tether, what felt like quiet warmth, the same kind I had learned to associate with the expression he had when something made him genuinely happy. I kept reading. This was what no one had told me about the soul tether, not the political texts, not the formal documentation of the rite, not the clinical assessments in the compact's bonding records. No one had told me that it was not simply a binding, it was a form of fluency. Over time, you learn to understand another person, not just through what they said but through what they were. Through the quality of their presence, the specific texture of their states when they moved through a room, the particular note of their silences. You learned them in a way that went under language and arrived at something simpler and more precise than words. I had been alone, in the specific way that people in powerful positions are always alone, for 300 years. The company of others had always been conditional, shaped by rank, or interest, or the specific kind of careful distance that comes with authority. I had not known that this was a condition. I had assumed it was simply the nature of the world. The tether taught me otherwise. 3 months after the ceremony, I gave a formal address to the Compact Council. It was, technically, a policy address on the matter of human representation in the elder chambers. A matter I had been building a case for since the second week of the pre-bonding period, though I would not have admitted that at the time. I argued for a permanent expanded seat for the human colonial government, backed by equal standing in treaty negotiations and a full voice in security decisions affecting the frontier systems. It was the most direct address I had given in 20 years. I did not soften the language. I did not wrap it in the careful diplomatic padding that made difficult things easier for comfortable people to accept. I said what I had come to say, with the full weight of my position and 3 centuries of credibility behind it, and I let every delegate in that chamber hear exactly what I meant. Councillor Dravith, who had delivered the council's original decision with his expression of mild satisfaction, was not mildly satisfied by the end of it. Several of his colleagues were deeply uncomfortable. That was fine. Discomfort in the comfortable was often the beginning of actual change. I did not look at Eli during the address. I did not need to. I felt him steady, warm, and precisely as present as he always was, at the tether's edge, the way you feel a known landmark in the dark. Simply there. Simply constant. When I finished, I stepped down from the platform with the same pace I had used when I stepped down from this same platform 3 months earlier, having just received the verdict that I had believed was the worst thing the council could have done to me. I know now what I did not know then. What felt like the worst thing was the thing that changed everything. And what I thought was an insult handed down by 21 delegates in a pale, colorless light turned out, in the end, to be the most honest beginning I had ever had. I came to the ceremony as a prisoner of what was required of me. I left it as something I do not have a clean word for yet, but I know it sits in my chest like starlight, steady and quiet and vast, and I have stopped trying to argue it away. It was never going to be argued away. Some things simply are, the way a stone at the bottom of a river simply is, not because they are trying, but because they have arrived at exactly where they belong.